We're now on Instagram, but I recommend you follow us here on T.O. Bonsam. It's better. Where do we have more resources? Today we're going to talk about the figure of Jesus of Nazareth. And naturally, this already touches on a subjective concept, an absolutely human concept, which is faith, the act of adhering to an idea. It can be explained rationally. It can be explained anthropologically. But I want to start from the first premise. Faith is a personal adherence. I decide to believe. This can, of course, be an invitation from God for many people. Theology, but I choose to believe, and our reflection will begin using an image from a contemporary painter, Parse, because they're going to put it on the Jew screen for you to see. This image makes a reference, for those who know the Bible better, to Revelation 3, which I think is 20. Verse I didn't even look at, Revelation 3, which says, "Behold, I stand at the door." This image of Jesus well-dressed, with a European type. This image that the West associated with Jesus. Jesus with clothing, with a tunic and a cloak. The Bible speaks of Jesus' cloak. The Bible shows several things, but it doesn't give any clues. Silva, relative Jesus. But this is a Jesus that most moves people, sweetly insisting that you open the door of your heart to accept the personal invitation of Jesus of Nazareth. We will see many images of Jesus. This is perhaps the one that most appeals to people, because today our ideal of God is a God quite customized, quite adapted to my will, and nothing like that God of the Last Judgment who is in the Sistine Chapel, or in the tympanums of medieval cathedrals like Notre Dame de Paris, where in the tympanum, that is, in the central entrance of cathedral, there is this Christ the judge, this Christ judging the world, according to Matthew 25, this image of a harsh Christ judging, sending the damned with blessed lips to the other. This one is not very successful anymore. The image of a sweet Jesus, a humble man of heart, knocking on the door, as in the apocalypse, inviting people as he invited the rich young man to do. So everything you have and give the poor. Come, follow me. This image is very successful. We will understand today why Jesus has so many layers to form so many images. So, which Jesus from the Bible have you ever thought about? That's what we're going to see. Therefore, I ask you to roll the intro and begin our live stream from the Bible with Carnal Community. Well, folks, we have an initial surprise for you. This surprise is something I've always recommended. The two Bibles I use most often. The João Ferreira de Almeida Bible, but I recommend the Jerusalem Bible to scholars for two reasons. Neither of them religious. The first reason? It's a direct translation from the Greek in the New Testament and from the Hebrew in the Old Testament. This is an essential condition, which is why the João Ferreira de Almeida Bible and the King James Bible are good translations of Luther. These are good translations because they are directly from the original languages, Greek for the 27 books of the New Testament, and Hebrew for 66 or 73 books. According to your confession, why do I recommend the Jerusalem Bible, besides a direct translation? Why does it have more than a classic Protestant Bible? We saw Protestant Bibles in the first stage of the community. We will return to this many times. Now, throughout the stage that is beginning, it does not have some texts, such as chapters 13 and 14 of Daniel, or the books of Maccabees, first, second book of Maccabees. So, if I am studying, here's everything that the excellent Protestant translator João Ferreira de Almeida did. All of that is here. But there is more. It's like you get an extra in your study. That's why I like it, you know? Jerusalem, an excellent translation, and I wrote to the publisher Paus, and my team contacted the publisher Paus, and they gave us some Bibles to raffle off to those who have already signed up for the community, which are many, and then also to raffle off to those who sign up today. So we're going to start raffling off 3 Bibles in this live stream. Folks, let's start compressing. We're going to start by raffling off 3 Bibles of Jerusalem, this extraordinary book. And since the 80s and the Brazilian publishing market, the 80s and 90s dominated the biblical publishing market. So I'm going to ask Gabriella here, who has the list of those already registered, which is more than 7,000, right, Gabriel? More than 7,000. I don't know this list. Really? You trust me. I don't know this list by heart. Trust my ethics. I haven't had any access to this list. I'm going to say random numbers. And these numbers correspond to an order of registration that Gabriella has, right? Let me think. I just said that the Protestant Bible, Luther's Bible, Calvin's Bible, the João Ferreira de Almeida Bible, good translations, has 66 books. So I'll start with that number 66, Gabriel. Can you locate the 66? That number just occurred to me. The following appears to be unrelated and possibly spam Kaya Delor de Medeiros Vieira Maria Delor de Medeiros Vieira. Look at that name, 400 name. It's registered. It's recorded. We'll arrange how we're going to send it to you. Look how lucky you were. You're going to win an excellent translation of the Jerusalem Bible, which is published by Paulus, who kindly sent us some copies. Let's move on to another issue. Let me think. It's the end of the Fourth Lateran Council. Let me see, 1216. This council is very important for the Bible. In 1216, Pope Innocent III governed the church. Gabriel is looking because I think the list is long. Here we do it live. Folks, Monique and Yoko Martins call camera Monique Yoko Martins Kawakami. If there's any problem, I'm listening to Gabriella. In the background, she's on the computer, and I can't see anything. So, Monique, you're the second person to win a Jerusalem Bible. Shall we move on to this issue? Let me think about it. 3217, wow, because this was 3,217.7 Caroline. Caroline Baldasso, 3 nice people registered for our community. Renewal here for the second year. 3 people, 1. We'll arrange it later. How are we going to send it to people? We have people's contact information. So, among the more than 7,000 registered so far, we have more than 7,000 who have already won 3 Bibles. At the end, I'm going to raffle off 3 more. But I'll send out numbers now, and then they'll send them to you, because people are registering. But the next 3 will be for new registrants. You who are watching, you can watch simply out of interest in the figure of Jesus. Interest in knowledge is perfect, but you can, during the live stream, decide, no, these ideas are interesting. I like this. I'm going to participate in this. So we're going to deal with exactly that. I've already shown the image of Jesus of Nazareth from the beginning, a very simple Jesus, but this image adapts itself. Look, for example, at the excellent painter from southern Spain, Murillo. He's famous for his image of the Immaculate Conception, and there we see a Holy Family with a little bird. Notice that there is no Holy Family in the first images of Christianity. Why? In the 17th century, we have a Holy Family because we begin to insert Jesus into a family order, no longer a typical medieval judge Jesus, not Jesus knocking on the door as our contemporary world likes, a sweet, meek, and humble Jesus, but a Holy Family, in addition to the beauty of the painting. Murillo, a Spanish writer, even the land of Velázquez, Seville, an extraordinary priest, adore Murillo. Murillo makes a Holy Family, and the Holy Families are much more contemporary. They need the century 1617 to 18 onwards to arrive at that marvelous basilica in Barcelona, the Basilica of the Sagrada Familia. We won't find a Holy Family in the 3rd century. No, we will find many references to Saint Joseph, for example, to Joseph, the adoptive father of Jesus. Now, to show what I am demonstrating here, that the image of Jesus depends on a historical moment. This doesn't mean that there isn't a real historical Jesus. It means that in each era, the face of Jesus has a face. In art, we would call an open sign. What is an open sign? You start to expand and adapt it. This sign adapts to each thing. Look at the following image. It's an orthodox model. It's a Christ Pantocrator, creator of everything, which has specific hand positions of Jesus, which show if he is teaching, if he is correcting, if he is redeeming, Christ the Redeemer. Do you remember Rio de Janeiro? Open arms in Buddha, we call them madras. These are the hand positions of Jesus, which determine the function he is performing. Are you teaching? Judging creates. What if Christ Pantocrator of a very interesting church in Russia, and it was built, the Church of the Spilled Blood, exactly on the spot where Tsar Alexander II, the liberal king who abolished serfdom, was assassinated in the street. On top of the place where he was assassinated, they built a church, and the face of this Jesus is nothing more than the face of Tsar Alexander. Look how interesting it is to put the face of the ruler of Russia. Look how interesting. In Latin, Caesar. In German, Kaiser. In Russian, fixing this derives from the Latin name. And there where he was assassinated, there we see the face of the Tsar in the face of Jesus. So, would that now be a political function of Jesus, so that people associate without using Jesus? Research is called in the course of Daddy, until at least the Russian Revolution, or at least until 1905. What is called Daddy is a somewhat familiar, somewhat affectionate relationship with the Russian people. And this is the Tsar. And this Tsar, Anna Paula. This couple has the face of Jesus. It's Christ Pantocrator, as you can see, a Christ inserted into a family with Christ knocking on the door, or a political Christ with the face of the cross are appropriations. These are things I want to do with Jesus because of the importance Jesus has. But they are appropriations. Let's continue with a very well-known face of Jesus. Commissioned by monks to paint a mural in a refectory. What did he decide? To put it like that? Okay, he decided to innovate instead of using the traditional fresco technique, which presupposes a quick painting, and once it's on the wall, it becomes eternal, permanent. He opted for a more time-consuming technique, and the result was that the painting started having problems very early on. Leonardo's technique is fascinating because it shows a centralized Christ. This Last Supper is perhaps one of the most reproduced paintings in history. Today, when I enter that refectory, there are two images, one of the cross of Christ at the back of the refectory, painted by another artist, and the other the Last Supper. You can't stay there for very long. You go into a room, so the humidity doesn't get in. The light is dimmed. There was a restoration sponsored by Pirelli in that region. I think it was Pirelli. I'm saying this now, thinking about it, and you don't stay long with this centralized image of Jesus instituting the Eucharist. This image of Jesus, who at the Last Supper instituted two sacraments of the Eucharist in order, is one of the most reproduced. Jesus with long hair, less beard. We are in the Renaissance. Less beard than the others. And there is Jesus, centered in a triangle from which rays of perspective emanate from his head. This image is one of the most reproduced, to the point that we have seen these images so many times that I think if Jesus appeared to us with another face, we would have difficulty, because Leonardo da Vinci and other Renaissance painters were very important in defining what the image is. Now, let's go to an image that I particularly like, which is also an image by the Sevillian painter Velázquez. It's a cross. It has a trace of Baroque realism. The wood of the cross appears with knots. That is, those knots in the wood are present in the wood. It's not a crucifix. The theatrical symbolism is a cross itself, and above all, it is in fact a corpse that we are seeing. Jesus has just died. The body is whitish. The body is already lifeless. The head hanging, and the feeling that this image conveys is one of profound solitude. This is a Spanish devotion by a religious painter. It's a very well-behaved, very traditional biography, linked to the thigh and Philip, according to Velázquez. Excuse me, how awful. Philip, if you tell the story, he was already dead. The body, according to him, died in the previous century. It's Philip IV. Nobody corrected me. Here it's Philip IV. In Spain, it's Philip IV who hired Velázquez almost his whole life, and Velázquez painted it. This solitary scene is not a theatrical cross. It's a cross on top of Golgotha, full of people. Now observe that the same Jesus who comes down from this cross in the same Baroque movement, the guy goes on to paint this deposition and burial of Jesus. Observe that there's a dramatic light in this. It's not solitude, but it's pain. It's not just Jesus dead, but it's a desolate community around him, his mother, including Joseph of Arimathea, the people who are involved in the deposition from the cross. A scene painted many times, a Pietà in practice painted many times. I want to go through this quickly. Why? We're going to Raphael's Transfiguration, which is a glorious Jesus. Today, in fact, it is one of the new ministries of light of the Reformation that the Catholic 1/3 underwent this transfiguration. Some know it from the Bible. He went with his closest disciples, the core circle, the hardest core, which is Peter, James, and John. He went up a mountain, and there Jesus separated into three: Moses, Elijah, and Jesus. His face lit up. That is the transfiguration. That is, there was an increase in the image of Jesus, Elijah, the one in the Old Testament. So we'll see Moses who gave the law, Jesus at the center, and Raphael made a cartoon for tapestries. The tapestries. The transfiguration of the miraculous catch of fish, very beautiful. And later it also became an oil painting. So very important. Each image that I make, Jesus, glorious, suffering, affectionate, political. It doesn't speak of Jesus. It speaks of the aesthetic conception or the political desire. It speaks of the group that creates, invents, and elaborates this image. This is one of the great art history lessons. An open sign, that is, one that adapts to each of these issues. And finally, a scene I'm going to quote, which is from the Gospel of John. Jesus is in an area that doesn't have such a clear and orthodox Jewish identity. Since the Samaritan, they don't accept the temple in Jerusalem. They only read the Torah. They don't accept the prophets. They don't accept the other rivers. They only read the Torah. They don't go to Jerusalem. They don't pay tribute to the temple. They live in, to this day I visited this Mary. To this day, they go to a particular mountain that is sacred to them, and they don't go there. That's why when Jesus, he shoots at the Samaritan woman, who is at a well, and the Samaritan woman says that they shouldn't be talking because there is enmity between the two groups. When she says that she doesn't want to keep drawing water, she always promises water that will give her eternal life, water forever, and she talks about the marriages she had. An episode that you might know from the Gospel of John. This image of a personal Jesus, John Jesus conversing, that this painter, who died in Italy, Kaufman's work is a personal relationship. It's not the solitude of Velasquez's cross. It's not the political image of Christ Pantocrator that I showed. It's not a sweet Holy Family. It's a personal relationship of Jesus with a woman, and more with a Samaritan woman. Jesus is saying, my message is not only for the Jews of Judea. It's not only for those a little less connected to Judea, like himself, Nazareth. My message is for everyone who adheres to my cause. I'll come back to this if I had to characterize an essence of Jesus' message as that which Paul conveyed. And the Gospels written after Paul, all the Gospel accounts are later than Paul's letters, insisted. He is not someone who came only for Jews he heals. And he goes to meet Samaritans. He pierces the people connected to the centurion. He heals and calls and attends to publicans, that is, tax collectors. He attends to prostitutes and forgives them. He goes to houses and throws parties at the homes of those who publish, like Zacchaeus or like the evangelist Matthew himself. Also, if I'm not mistaken, Jesus is saying my message is for everyone. My message isn't just for the Jews. He is the Messiah, different from what the Jews expected. But his message is universal. And this is a characteristic that these images I'm showing will reveal these many layers. That we have to construct Jesus of Nazareth and that show, and also against sleep. After all, we call Jesus of Nazareth, and according to the Bible itself, he is Jesus of Bethlehem. He was born in Bethlehem. He had to be born in Bethlehem because it had a theological place. It was obligatory. According to the Old Testament, he was born in the city of David, Bethlehem, in the city of the second king of Israel, Solomon's father, David. So Jesus has to be born in Bethlehem. And in fact, he is associated with Nazareth. And being a Nazarene that is from Galilee, he also suffers prejudice from the Jews. Do you remember a phrase where Nathanael asks, can anything good come out of Nazareth? It's as if I were saying, if I'm from Rio Grande do Sul, I'm thinking of another state. Something good might come from that state. I won't name a specific state, but I can say that about another state. If you don't like a certain region, a certain city. It's exactly the xenophobia that even appears against Jesus, because someone from Galilee isn't someone from Judea, that small area occupied by the Romans, where there were Romans like Herod the Great. He was born later. The hero says he succeeded him, which is when Jesus died. He was born and died under Herod. Jesus was born during the reign of Augustus and died during the reign of Tiberius. These kings and emperors lived in a very small area, and Jesus was immersed in these local hatreds. The scribes and Pharisees were very attached to the law. The Pharisees believed in angels and the afterlife. They deeply believed in the Mosaic Code, not working on the Sabbath. They criticized Jesus, who harvests grain on the Sabbath. They criticize Jesus, who heals on the Sabbath. We have the Sadducees, who are wealthier, connected to the temple, a vast, extraordinary source of money that the Jews have to visit frequently. They have to pay tribute. They have to give money to the temple. And there are the Sadducees, the high priests, the most powerful groups. Sadducees don't believe in life after death, or Sadducees are wealthier. We have the Essenes. I live in caves, in communities that we would almost call monks today. We have political radicals, the Zealots. We have the Herodians, who are the Jews who approach the government of King Herod, who serve Herod, and so on. That is, these are the contradictions. And a Jesus, which is a proper name associated with a Greek title, Christ. Christ is a Greek title, anointed. The chosen one also appears in the Bible, Emmanuel, God with us. Emmanuel, God with us. He is one of 72 attributes of God in the Old Testament. So let's think, how am I going to know who Jesus is? First, through the sources. What are the oldest sources? And there comes our first problem in knowing, for example, what the real figure Jesus is. The oldest source is the letters of Paul. The letters of Paul. They were written by someone. Paul, who didn't see Jesus, didn't see him directly. Paul heard the voice of Jesus on the road to Damascus. Paul went blind. Paul would have had a mystical vision. This is a tradition, but Paul never lived with Jesus. Therefore, whoever first wrote about Jesus did not hear him. Of the 4 Gospels, 2 are attributed to him. Of the Gospels, 2 are later than Paul's. Paul is from the 50s, early 60s of the first century, and the first Gospels are between 60 and 70 Mark, between 70 and 80 Luke and Matthew, and from 90 to 100 onwards, John. John and Matthew, disciples of Jesus, are attributed to disciples of Jesus. Luke and Mark never saw Jesus, so it would be a kind of verbal portrait. The oldest is the first Gospel, the shortest with 16 chapters. There's also no Quran, the holy book of Islam, that was written and published while the Prophet was alive. The Prophet died in 632, and only after that did the Quran become a book. And since almost all Muslims, though not all, have a prohibition against the representation of people, animals, and so on, but not always, I have a composite sketch. At most we have, for example, busts of some Roman emperors, and with the Romans, they are not very realistic. We have the possibility of imagining what their faces look like, but it's not that Jesus is exceptional. We don't know what the faces of most great figures look like. We have no idea what Socrates' face actually looked like. We have descriptions. But these are our creations that art history will later transform into a Socrates, for example, marked by the call you see because of some descriptions. But we don't have images. You can't imagine what the world was like before. Cell phones had to imagine more than photograph. So it's not just about Jesus and Abraham. It's about Moses and Nebuchadnezzar, the great emperor of Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar II, who destroyed the first temple, who conquered an extraordinary empire, who died insane, Nebuchadnezzar, our second. We have images based on a Babylonian code that doesn't give any identity. You can't distinguish who it is, like the images of the pharaohs. Very similar. So what does this mean? It's not an exceptional case. We don't have any physical description of Jesus. We have clues that he was a man. We'll talk about that later. Living in the first century in that region, being of Jewish descent, the chance of him being blonde with blue eyes is very low. It would be like finding someone blonde with blue eyes in a rural African community. That's very short, a dark-haired man with beard. Shorter. But if you have faith that the Shroud of Turin is a true relic that enveloped the body of Jesus, his height would be exceptional. 1.80 meters is the height of the Shroud of Turin. If you read a very famous book series from the 80s, I read Operation Trojan Horse. You have to be old enough to have read it. It shows someone's time machine going back to the time of Jesus. There, too, Jesus is tall, a man of 1.80 meters. In Palestine, occupied by the Romans, he was a giant, because the average height was much less, but he is certainly a man, dark-skinned, a man who will be represented in many ways, with a Roman face, with other faces for us. We will see other images, but he is a dark-skinned and a short man. Everything we have about that time shows the Roman descriptions of the Jews as dark-skinned people, shorter, and Jesus is a man of the people, considered a carpenter. There is some doubt about the facts. He followed his father's profession, considered a carpenter. For some, he is a peasant from Galilee, the area that receives the most rain in the current state of Israel. For example, the low north of the Golan Heights is Galilee, and Galilee is one of the places with the most water. If I compare it to the south, to the Negev, for example, the Galilee desert is green. It's green, I helped. It's much drier, and the Negev is an extremely arid desert. Let's put 11. The image of the map from that time. When you use the Brazilian rivers, like Araguaia, like Parana, like Tite, which is large, then you'll see the Jordan River. It's a pretentious stream. It's not the stream, the Jordan, a very small river that connects two watercourses of the Sea of Galilee, which is further north, where so many biblical scenes take place. It's not the miraculous catch of fish, calming the storm, the vocation of Peter and his brother, right? To the Sea of Galilee, then the Jordan River, this waterway, and finally, the lowest point on planet Earth, which is the Dead Sea, where the heat and evaporation are so intense that the salinity prevents life, for the most part, except for bacteria near its beginning, but it's a very high salinity and it's very hot. It's very stuffy, especially when I leave those more than 450 meters of depth, the lowest point on Earth, and then up to Jerusalem. The Jews call this an elevated place, right? I go up to Jerusalem, a high, cold city, even compared to the Dead Sea. It's cold with stones that turn golden in the sunlight. That's why they say Jerusalem is beloved, right? The Golden City is beautiful when you get closer to Jerusalem. When I go up to Jerusalem, it's another climate. It's another world. Then down to the Dead Sea, down to that region. And Jesus traveled from Galilee to the Negev because he was in a desert. We often say that he denies it, but finding a barren place to be tempted is easy. In Israel, there are many mountains, fences, many places without water, and Jesus knows his region. They're in the North Galilee, right next to Samaria, where the Samaritan is so often mentioned in the Bible. Remember Luke's parable, the Good Samaritan. Then we have Judea, that is, where the greatest identity of the Jewish faith lies, in the epicenter of this world, the city that is more than 3,000 years old, the Middle Current. This is not Mount Jericho, that is more than double that. Jericho is the oldest continuously inhabited city in the world. The one Joshua conquered in the book of Exodus still exists today. Jesus lived in this world, experiencing it. Jesus is the water of the Sea of Galilee, the Jordan River, where he was baptized. Oh, and his experience of the desert and its dryness. This is a geographical world of Jesus, spanning several times, especially in the beginning, which our first block is the soil where this faith began, the region in detail. How does the region of Jesus Nazareth work? Why is Bethlehem so theologically important, representing Jerusalem in that context? Jerusalem, the city that was destroyed twice and 62 times completely by Babylonians and Romans, 2 temples destroyed, and at least half in the First Crusade, because when the Crusaders took Jerusalem in 1099, the reason with the city, this extraordinary city, full of history, sacred to 3 religions, to Jews, obviously to Christians, and to Muslims, in that order of historical appearance. So, what is this Judaism of Jesus? He didn't come from nowhere. There are several currents within Judaism, and one of them, from the 1st century before the birth of Jesus, speaks of a rabbi whom the Jews call a gentleman closer to the word Hillel, but when people say Egerler, they mean Rabbi Hillel. He begins to teach that the word is more important than the text itself, that charity surpasses the law, that adherence to God is not just paying tithes, keeping the Sabbath, not eating pork. Adherence to God is charity, and he summarizes it in a golden rule. It's not about not doing to others what I would want done to myself, but about doing to others what I would want them to do to me. This so-called golden rule is present in this broader, less legalistic, less mosaic, more religious current. More people who don't want the exact fulfillment of all the rules of the law, but adherence to a religion and a faith. It so happens that the grandson of the rabbis is called Gamaliel. He is the rabbi who instructed Saul of Tarsus. Look at the connection. Saul of Tarsus learned Judaism from Hillel's grandson. Saul of Tarsus learned this interpretation, and when he incorporated it, after his conversion, he incorporated the message of Jesus. He would incorporate this current, which is why the rabbi is so important in Christianity. And Gamaliel is one of the great names of the broader Judaism, more about attitude, less about law. And Saul, now becoming Paul of Tarsus, is nothing more than an expansion of this current here. But this current, naturally, will have to coexist with adaptations. I will continue with this image of Jesus. If you remember, it was on television at some point. I saw the premiere in the cinema. Jesus of Nazareth. Franco Zeffirelli made a beautiful film. I still like that film today. A Jesus with dark hair and pool blue eyes. Totally an image of a Jesus with a rather aquiline nose. An image of a Jesus that is perhaps in the imagination of many people. Dark hair, not as blonde as Raphael. He's going to paint him. Dark hair, or the Nazarene school. Germans in Rome who always paint Jesus very blonde. But with Jesus with blue eyes, uncommon at that time, it would be a very exceptional indication. Is that the image? It's a very popular image. Now, the BBC has done an anthropometric study with skeletons found from that time, with forensic facial reconstructions. And the BBC suggested the darkest-skinned Jesus we've ever seen. We have an image from the BBC documentary on the screen. This Jesus is probably not seen in most churches, and almost never in the history of art. This Jesus is the one that, based on anthropometric facial measurements, would have been identified by the Romans as an inhabitant of that region in the 1st century. In other words, this is an image that is historically closer to the historical Jesus. All the other images are Jesuses, I don't know the plural of Jesus, that are not Europeanized. Of course, if you looked at it more, you found it strange, because you were formed in cinema, in art history, in paintings, by a Jesus with straight hair, tending towards, of course, light eyes, tall, thin, elegant, well-dressed. This is the image that is probably the most historical of the historical Jesus. And I include it because I really like this series. It's already 8 years old, right? To watch everything that's already on Netflix. The Chosen. I really like this series. It has a lot of imagination. For you, do you see a Jesus whose clothes? They are much closer to the story, because dye is something expensive. Only rich people have colorful clothes. Poor people have beige clothes. Because he is dressed in red, purple, blue, it's a sign of a lot of money. Or the dye that makes purple, which is a Mediterranean shell. The Phoenicians sold it. It's associated with royalty. It's very expensive in Rome. It's a sign of great prominence. Jesus, his disciples, wore pastel tones. And this series restores that only when Matthew leaves his tax collector's post, where he is, wearing silk clothes, even, and starts walking with Jesus, and there's more color. But then he in this series restores that only when Matthew leaves his tax collector's post, wearing silk clothes, and starts walking with Jesus, and has more color. But then, after 3 years of walking with Jesus, he begins to lose that color. The shorter garment, Jesus' tunic, doesn't reach the ground, it goes to the knee. This is more practical for a hot desert land, where people predominantly walk barefoot and exceptionally wear sandals. Jesus is not described in the gospel as miserable, because we know that one of the apostles manages a collection box. What does that mean? Does he have money to give to the poor? According to Jesus, at a certain point a woman touches his tunic. That woman who bleeds and dies, Isa, as they call in the Bible, the tunic and the cloak. Jesus speaks of giving the cloak, because having a cloak already signifies a slightly higher social status. If Jesus was in fact a carpenter? And notice that none of his metaphors are about carpentry, about agriculture. I am the vine, you are the branches, I am the good shepherd, sometimes livestock. If Jesus was a carpenter, know that carpentry brings in a lot of money, especially in Nazareth, because there is little wood, and it is very important to make a piece of furniture, a chair, a bench. So it's not a low profession. No, not a humble profession. We could imagine, well, even today, right? Try making a custom-made piece of furniture, and you'll see wood continues to be in high demand. But I really like this series for the imagination, for the miracles, for the emotional scenes. I really like one I saw on the internet. The actor's visit to the Pope. No, and then what? It appeared below when the owner visits the company. Jesus with the Pope is not a joke. The actor with the head of the Catholic Church. This Jesus. From the beginning, he announces himself as the Messiah, but he is not the Messiah they were expecting. He is not a political Messiah. I did not come to restore the glory of Israel. I came to restore a kingdom. I came to bring about a personal conversion. I came to fulfill a spiritual desire. And several times he says, my kingdom is not of this world. This Jesus brings ideas that are in Rabbi Hillel, in Gamaliel, in Paul, since this Jesus of the Gospels was already influenced by Paul's letters. Grace is universal. Forgiveness is absolute if there is repentance. But I have to forgive my brothers. As the Lord's Prayer says, one of the 7 petitions of prayer, which is in Matthew, I have to forgive my brother in order to receive God's forgiveness. Do not forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. What are the core ideas of this Jesus? If you don't want to read anything, you have no time for anything. What did Jesus say? The core is in chapters 56 and 7 of Matthew, the Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes, permanent forgiveness, charity, condemnation concerned with riches, glances, leader of the field. Look at the birds of the air. They neither toil nor spin, yet not even Solomon in all his steadfast love. And he brought glory. He invested himself as one of them. That is the central thought of Jesus. My message is for everyone. Do not distance yourself from me, tax collectors and prostitutes, because I came for sinners and not for the righteous. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees! Woe to you who beat your breasts and say you follow God, but are harsh with your brothers, hypocrites, brood of vipers, whitewashed tombs. It is a heavy accusation. That is, on the outside it's pretty, on the inside it's rotten, hypocritical. Jesus speaks ill of the Pharisees. They were very popular at that time. All this speaks very badly of the Pharisees. The Pharisees take care of the spiritual life of the people. For example, funerals, and they take care of prayers in the synagogues, and so on. Jesus speaks of them, not because they are Pharisees. Even if Jesus believes in angels, as appears in the afterlife, he is more frightening to the Pharisees than others, but he criticizes our hypocrisy. Religion is not going to synagogue. Religion is not paying tithes on everything, because he says, woe to him who knows how to tithe even the smallest things, but has no charity. Religion is a practice. He summarizes the Bible as loving God above all things and your neighbor as yourself. This is a quote from Rabbi Hillel Jesus. Expanding on these images here, let's show that in the parables of Samaritans, for example, who is truly my neighbor? It's not the priest. It's not someone who identifies with Israel. But as he says in Luke, who is the one who will practice good? The Samaritan who gives money welcomes a person, and the others pass by quickly. The episode at the gas station, which I already quoted in the same way. Jesus, without making distinctions. Yes, there's an image in red. I don't know if we have one of Jesus with Martha and Mary. That episode, it's very important to see Meer, that extraordinary 17th century Dutch painter who painted the girl with the pearl earring. A clue from Delson, one of the 6 best painters of the 17th century, alongside Ambra and others. And he's going to paint a relatively simple scene. Jesus went to visit his friends. I love you. He knows how to tithe even on the smallest things, but he lacks charity. Religion is a practice. He summarizes the Bible as loving God above all things, and your neighbor as yourself. That's a retelling. This is absolutely a quote from Rabbi Hillel Jesus. Expanding on these images here, we will show that in the parables of the Samaritans, for example, who is truly my neighbor, it is not the priest, it is not the one who identifies with Israel, but when he speaks in Luke, who is the one who will practice good? The Samaritan, who gives money, welcomes the person, and the others pass by quickly. The episode at the gas station, which I already quoted in the same way. Jesus, without making distinctions. Yes, there's an image in red. I don't know if we have that of Jesus with Martha and Mary. That episode. It's very important to see Meer, that extraordinary 17th century Dutch painter who has a girl with a pearl earring as seen by God, Thrones, one of the best painters of the 17th century, alongside Ambra and others. And he's going to paint a relatively simple scene. Jesus went to visit his friends. Tehan reminds us that Lazarus was resurrected, their brother, and Martha is working. That's why St. Martha is the patron saint of hoteliers, right? She's working, making bread, serving olives, the kind of things that were served in the first century. And Mary is sitting listening. This episode is very interesting, which I only noticed now while reading a recent book by an Italian theologian, that when Mary is listening and Martha is working, Martha is performing a feminine role expected in the first century, domestic service. And Mary is playing the role of a disciple. She is standing still, learning something that traditionally only men could do. And Jesus says she has chosen the better part. There will always be work. It's not him. When Martha complains that her sister isn't helping, he says, she has chosen the better part. Jesus treated Mary as a disciple. Besides that, Jesus is accompanied by women. The Marys of Jesus, Mary Magdalene, Mary, his mother, Mary, wife of Cleophas, Mary of Jesus, are there at the cross. In fact, the women were remarkably more faithful than the men who went to the cross. Only one of Jesus' disciples went to the cross. John and all the women are there. Mary is there the whole time. The other women are supporting Mary. The women are learning. We have an apocryphal gospel of Mary Magdalene. It's a Gnostic gospel. Later we'll learn what the Gnostics are about this image. It's an image of a revolution. It's an image of something very important to us. This image, people, will mess with people's heads so much that we even have people with mental problems who think they are Jesus. Okay, we had an experiment that perhaps couldn't be done today because it was a psychologist. He played with 3 people, this is real, who thought they were Jesus. He decided to have an idea. Let's put these 3 people together to talk, so that one would say to the other, I am Jesus, or no, I am the other, or I am them. Notice, in short, that it can't be like that. There can be 3, right? The experiment results in all 3 continuing to believe they are Jesus. And it's a film about that. It's a film about insanity, about mental disturbance, about delirium, about false personality, mental fragmentation. But it's a film about the importance of Jesus of Nazareth. That is, when I want to be someone, I want to react and be someone. It's called the Ypsilanti experiment, isn't it? I don't know if that's how it's pronounced. Try the 3. There's a film about that. If you want to see it, what am I talking about so far, folks? Quite a lot. I talk nonstop. I'm not a professor. I talk nonstop. I'm even talking now about some details of Jesus' appearance, his ideas, how evangelicals already have a production about Paul, and Paul already a production based on Rabbi Hillel's image of Jesus, like the first images of Jesus in catacombs, 2nd and 3rd centuries. Jesus appears beardless, as a good shepherd, or imitating the Greek sun Helios, or even in graffiti. We have graffiti, one of the oldest offenses to Christianity, including graffiti on a house in Greek, but they're in the Roman hills, Nashi, or at least the name of the graffiti. These images are all much later than Jesus. It's like if I asked you, what does your great-great-grandmother look like if there are no photos or paintings of her? How would your great-great-grandmother appear if there were no photos and no oil paintings? This is what I want to know, because culture produces an image, and by studying the Bible, we will recover what we're going to do in the community, what we have in the community, which is very important. First of all, we have an audio every morning, a commentary. They've already started. We haven't even had the first class yet. It starts now in December, but the audios have already started. We're already in the 2nd week, I think, of audio where I take a passage here on Monday. Today is Sunday, and on Monday, as I'm going to start tomorrow, I'll begin to explain in more detail. For example, the book of Ecclesiastes, the 3rd book. Good morning, LTD, my Brighton. Ecclesiastes chapter by chapter. And we start in the morning with 2 or 3 minutes talking about it to help your day start well. Every morning you listen on your way to work, on the treadmill, walking down the street, a short message to think about, the Bible, but I don't have time in the morning. Listen when you can. When you subscribe, those audios are there for you to listen to whenever you can. During the week, I can't discuss them all on Saturday in sequence. That will be 5 from Monday to Friday, 5 hours, and 10 to 15 minutes on Saturday. And if there's a logical sequence, you will hear my voice explaining passages from the Bible from the point of view of studies. From religious, historical, and anthropological interpretation, we have that every week. One lesson every Friday. Before we had a mention, it was requested we changed it. We have now. Every week when you join the community, you'll also have access to 11 live sessions every last Saturday morning of the month. Again, I could have watched the class on Fridays and Saturdays. So don't worry. You can watch this class or even the recorded live sessions whenever you want. This is a good thing about an online course like this. You set your own pace. I've planned things for every day, but especially on Fridays and the last Saturday of each month. In addition, you'll have access to a private Instagram account, exclusive for you, where we post materials and more book recommendations, short excerpts, and things that will help with your studies. Leandro Colonel guarantees there's no wokeness in the community. There are no people like that. You're wrong, you idiot. No, that doesn't exist. It's forbidden. We can disagree, but we can't be rude. You'll leave that toxic internet environment, that environment of people attacking each other, listening to audios, having classes, seeing likes, participating in the community, giving your opinion, sending your questions, and so on. And for the second stage, I thought about modules. Last year I didn't do this, and I missed it. So this year I established modules with the classes already planned. So when you register, until next year, it's a price lower than a pizza. At least here in Sao Paulo, it's much lower than a pizza. You'll have a year of access to this information. For example, Module 1, where the Bible took place. I missed last year, for example, talking about geography, classes with maps, with more photos that I took in the Holy Land. We're going to study the environment where these stories arose. Where you are is where Abraham came from. What are these great rivers of Eden, which deserters had experienced, with the importance of all this? The Mod 1, day the Bible occurred. The Mod 2, about when it was written. What we have of information about the Babylonian exile, when the entire Old Testament began to be stitched together. Then a second moment in Alexandria, translation into Greek, addition of books. Then a third moment of writing the Bible to the great moments, not the only ones, which is the first century. The New Testament, almost entirely written between the years 50 and 100, very little, surpasses the first century and enters the second. Let's look at these moments. Let's talk, for example, about the origins of the one God. How did a revolutionary idea arise? The only and first monotheism in the world, which would later influence other monotheisms, such as Christianity and Islam. How did the Jews come to think of an abstract God, without form, without image? And that, he is unique. How do we go from monolatry, only one God, can be worshipped, to monotheism? Then we go to the Bible. Greek thought is a beautiful debate about Athens and Jerusalem. Let's not forget that Paul preached in the Areopagus in Athens, right? That John preached in and married in the great center of Greek philosophical thought, right? Paul also preached in Ephesus. We have a narrative of his near death by the worshippers of Diana in the Acts of the Apostles. Then Mod 5. When the Bible becomes a book of the church, how does the Bible become a condensed book that the church has access to? I can't read it in another language. What are the effects of adopting pens? The version of St. Jerome, the Vulgate. And how did these metaphors begin to appear in the Bible from the translation into Latin? How does it reach the people? Mod 6. That is, how much do the reforms mean for the Bible? This topic is fascinating. I love debating the Reformation, especially Luther's translation of Calvin. Let's talk about João Ferreira de Almeida. These days, I heard again a false idea that they say about him that he was a priest. No, he wasn't a priest. That's a false idea that's been attributed to him since the 18th century, a century after his death. He's an extraordinary man, a very good translator, but he was never a priest. The Bible in the Americas is one of my research topics. I have a book about it, Theater of Faith, how the Bible is presented, for example, to the natives. Consult Witchcraft as it is presented to Catholics in America today. Dita Latina, who wants archaeology in Mod 8, reveals about the Bible. It's not a little. We found an amulet a little while ago. She's talking about a few years ago. An amulet in a tomb with a blessing from the book of Numbers prior to the 6th century. That is, not everything was written in the 6th century. Some things are earlier. For those who know the Bible well, the blessing of Numbers is beautiful. The Lord bless you and keep you. I will keep his face, people, his face bring you peace. This blessing from the book of Numbers is prior to the writing in the 6th century. The Bible, Western culture. Let's talk about the popular imagination, the Bible, political movements as the Bible was invoked several times, module of this Bible. Today, the Bible also in Mod 11, as an open sign, signifying prosperity theology. What is its biblical basis? Liberation theology? What is its biblical basis? The various theologies? The Bible invoked to be for or against abortion. The Bible invoked for freedom or for oppression. The Bible invoked in many ways and by many groups. In addition to all this content, folks, until next year, besides all this, there's much more. In addition to all this, if you register, you will receive an e-book with biblical reflections, a text that will conceive from my reflections, with commentary and hooks for personal reflection. You will receive a special class on the Apocrypha, this immense collection of books that are not in the official Bible, but are fundamental. The other apocalypses, the other Gospels, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, the Acts of Pilate, and other texts that are not in the official Bible. And thanks also to the agreement of my dear friend Cortella, we will have an audio series on philosophy of life. He's a great friend. The exceptional philosophy you recognize by his unique tone of voice. The people who access it now will gain the benefit of the great Cortella series, a very intelligent man. And this series is very good about philosophy of life. That is, what can I get from it? From the philosophy that guides. The subscription is annual. Does that mean you subscribe, as our code stipulates? You have a few days to cancel if you change your mind. And when do the classes officially start? We already have material. We have material for those who are joining and for those who are renewing. Ma'am, for those who are new and haven't done the first stage. The second stage doesn't require the first stage. You can join. You'll understand everything. No problem. You'll join. I'm not going to assume everyone knows. I'm going to repeat some things. We're going to move on to what we haven't done. From geography, I hardly talked about it in the previous stage, to the uses of the Bible today. If we have a Bible caucus in our Congress, which Bible is that? If someone in Congress wants to create an official Bible, what kind of effort is this that has existed from the 5th century until today? A single official Bible that no one disagrees with? Why do we have to do this at that moment? In that way, you will learn things that I haven't touched on. I will enter the political and biblical arena not to express a position, but to say that each group invokes it in its defense, because after all, the Bible is invoked by almost everyone. The Bible is invoked by the MST, Landless Workers Movement. The Bible is invoked by priests linked to liberation theology. The Bible is invoked by the far right and by conservative movements. What Bibles and invocations are these then? Audios, weekly classes, monthly live streams, closed social network, study community, and these exclusive bonuses? And then you will see the values that appear. This is the part one never know, because I am the source, the content, right? You will see the values. Folks, if you sign up now, these are special prices. Secure your registration, review it, and you'll see it start right away. There's already material online, but officially we start with a class on December 5th. That's right, December 5th. My part is content, right? I don't deal with accounting books. My part is content. I'm a teacher who studies, who is enthusiastic about the subject. I'm always saying the same thing. I taught a 1-year course at Casa de Saber on Greek mythology. At the end, nobody asked me, "Do you believe in God?" You talk so much about Aphrodite. Do you believe in the goddess of love? No. I taught a course of almost a year on Buddhism, with 8 months, all the Buddhist branches. Nobody asked me if I'm Buddhist. I open my mouth to talk about the Bible, and someone asked me, "But Leandro, you don't have a religion, do you?" I once told Joe Soares, I'm a gynecologist, a man who studies what doesn't exist. The Bible is a fundamental book. It's a book that defines culture. The Bible is essential for understanding the West. There's no possibility of understanding the history of art, no possibility of understanding literature without having read the Bible. The Bible is essential for understanding these things, no matter your religion.